أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صدق الله العلي العظيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we continue in our series of studying the short surahs of the Quran. Last week we covered Surah Al and today I intend to cover Inna Atayna Al Kawthar as well as Qul Ya Ayyuhal Kafirun inshallah. So let's start off with our revision very briefly. So this is the surah we covered last week with some of the highlights that we also looked at. And just few elements that maybe I didn't cover, I'll just touch on now as well. So we did mention that the first 3 verses were very Makki in the sense that it was addressing those that were denying the religion. So deen can be translated as both the religion, which refers to Islam, or the day of judgment, or the day of accountability, or the day of reckoning, or the day of paying at the end. And both those connotations are correct. Then apart from it says the first problem people have in the Meccan society was that they yukadhibu bid-din, they denied either Islam as well as the day of the reckoning at the end. Then they also did, in terms of the aristocracy, they did the following. They yadu'ul yatim, which is they distanced themselves from the yatim, the poor person. And they also yahuddu ala ta'amil miskin, which is they did not encourage the feeding of the poor. And then it says, woe or destruction be on those who perform salah. Alladhina hum an salatihim sahun, those who are very heedless or neglectful or forgetful about their salah. Also they do it for the sake of being visible and being seen by others. In other words, their whole intention is not one of niyyah, of ikhlas and sincerity, but more as a show, to show the rest of the congregation that they are performing salah. And very importantly, the last verse tying up with the top 2 verses, which is yamna'un al-ma'un, that is, they prohibit or discourage the feeding or the giving of even very, very small, insignificant charities. And I think we use the plate as an example to show the bare essentials of life that some people don't have. And some people who are in a position to assist, they actually hinder or prohibit others from actually doing. They don't do it themselves and they prohibit others from doing it. Now, the one thing I didn't touch on was the fact that if you look at the rhyme scheme here, if you look at Biddin, Al-Yatim, and Al-Miskin, these last few words have got that same sort of sound of Ina, Ima, whatever, right? So those kind of form one pattern or one group. And it carries on to Lil Musallin, but it changes tech after that. Then it goes to Sahun, Yura'un, and Al-Ma'un. Can you see the rhyme scheme there? So it's essentially like 2 themes in this particular surah, which we just need to be wary of or careful of. Then, or rather to take cognizance of. The other thing we did mention is yatim is mentioned in its singular form, not yatama, or aitam, which is the plural. So in other words, these are the people that distance themselves even from one single yatim. We're not talking even of the collective. There are many yatims or many aitam around us, orphans, but they distance themselves even from the single person. And likewise, the ta'amil miskin, not masakin, which is plural, it's talking about the one person that needs the food, right? The ta'amil miskin. Now, if it was referring to Muslims only, then the adjective Muslim would have appeared after the word yatim or after the word miskin. So it would be yadu'ul yatima al-muslima. If you want to technically say it's only referring to Muslims. But if you look at this surah, it's general. It's, in other words, talking about a problem in society at large, and therefore we need to be careful of the fact that, we don't only look after the Muslim yatim or the Muslim orphan or the Muslim poor person. It's generally in society. So you got to look at, in other words, the needs of the full society at large. And that's what the surah is telling us. Go beyond that narrow parochial way of us doing our charities, where we only consider the Muslims. We should consider everybody at large. Then, in terms of maybe one or two other things I can maybe mention. So here we're talking of, it's not a reference to Muslim only, poor and orphan and needy, but it's a universal human right and a dignity that we need to give to all human beings. Now, what should we as a community be doing? And is our help, whatever help we give to the one person, is it really insignificant? That is the question. Now, if you look at globally, the population of the world currently is about 7.9 billion, touching 8 billion. And Muslims are about 1.8 billion, which is approximately 1/4 of the world's population. Now, we might say that, you know what, just dealing with the Muslims alone is enough, and we should be concentrating on them mainly, which is correct. But I think the need of society is very, very great, especially we living in Muslim, sort of as minorities in a majority country that's not Muslim. We need to really look at everybody's needs in the society. Now, where do we start? Now, there's a famous story about the monk who tried to change the world. He says that when I was a young boy, I wanted to change the world, and I found it was very difficult to change the world. So I focused more on my nation or my city or my state. And from there, he says, I couldn't even change that. Then I looked at my town or my village. And finally, he said, you know, that's also too big a morsel to swallow. Let me rather just change my family. And now as an old man, he realized that the only thing really that you can change, that's in your hands to change, is myself. In other words, me and you as individuals. And once we do that in ourselves, then we can then look at the impact we can have on our families. And then the families will have the impact on the towns or villages around us. And after that, we can change a nation, and thereafter change the whole world. So I think where we have to start is start off small and do what's in our hands to do, and at least make a start. That's the main thing. So I've listed here a few Muslim NGOs. There's many active in the field. And we looked at other bodies that are also in the Johannesburg area, like the Oasis Haven, Village Safe Haven, the Tender Loving Children's Care Home. There's many of those as well. All of them doing good work for the orphans, the needy, the destitute, those suffering from HIV/AIDS. And I think our effort should be on all these segments of societies. And just one caveat about it is that you should, before donating to any of these organizations, look at their track record and reviews from other donors. In other words, has there been any mismanagement of funds or not? And if not, then by all means, give to all these organizations as much as you can. And the last question is, when do you start? There's no better time to start than to decide that today and now I can actually make a start and make a difference. I want to connect those surahs that we've done so far with the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, what I've done in this particular slide is I've shown you some key milestones in his life, which is this top row going across. So it starts 570 Christian era, 570 after in the Christian era, as it were. And this same year was called the year of the elephants, the Amul Fil, that we studied in Surah Al-Kawthar. And this 50 odd days after the year of the elephants, and the elephants were destroyed and Abraha's army was destroyed, was the birth of the magnificent Nabi Mahomed sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And before he was even born, his father Abdullah had died. So he was left with a mother alone. Then 6 years, and this is his age going just under this heat map. So at 6 years age, his mother Amina also dies. So technically, both father and mother gone at the tender age of 6, is almost like still as a kid. He himself is an orphan. And how did the Quraysh treat him as an orphan? And I think that's the theme of a lot of these surahs that we're going to study. And he himself was also ill-treated by some of the inveterate enemies of Islam, and we're going to see that unfolding in his life. Then at the age of 25, he acquired such a history of being truthful and honest that he gained the two nicknames Al-Amin and As-Sadiq, meaning the absolutely truthful and the absolutely honest, to such an extent that Khadija entrusted him with the caravan of camels that were doing trade in Syria. And when he came back with the camels and with the goods, she realized that her business had also improved dramatically as a result of having a very honest manager in charge. And obviously from there, a relationship developed in the sense that Khadija was a widow at the age of 40, and she actually proposed to the Prophet ﷺ, who was at the age of 25, and both sides agreed to get married. Now, I think why I'm telling you this is sometimes there's a lot of taboos in our society about who should be proposing, whether it's the boy side or the girl side. And here's an example from the Sunnah of the Prophet that actually a lady, and a widow at that, much older, actually proposes to a young man of age 25. So I think there's a lot of taboos that we need to eradicate after we really understand the seerah or the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Then they were giving each other comfort, and at the age of 40 he went to the cave of Hira, and that's where the first revelation of Iqra, the first 5 verses were revealed. And after a few years of revelation from 40 to about 46, we find that Islam started spreading from one person to his wife, to his son, to his closest friend. It got to a group of about 30, 40 people. And when Islam started sort of on an ascent, that's when the kuffar of Quraysh said, you know what, we've got to do something to arrest the situation, because this is a man coming with a new religion to an idol-worshipping community, but trying to upset the apple cart. He's trying to change the status quo. So what they came with is two things. He was told, first of all, to go out there and proclaim the message. So he did that. He climbed Mount Safa one day, and he said to the people that, you know what, if I tell you there's an army behind this hill ready to attack you, will you believe me? And they all resoundingly said yes, because they never knew him to lie. So he had a credential of being honest at that time already. So then he proposed the message of Islam, and then Abu Lahab was one of them to say, you know what, you called us here for this message, I'm going away. There was just total rejection. And at this particular point, it was Hazrat Ali that actually accepted Islam, one of the first early youth to accept Islam. Then the offers that were made, they used Abu Talib, who was one of the uncles, who was not a Muslim, but at least he was sympathetic to his nephew Mahomed. And they told him, you know what, you make an offer to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 3 offers. And normally they start off with sort of gentle offers. They say, if you have sort of an ego that wants to have power, then we'll ensure that you become like a king or a chieftain over all the tribes in Medina, and we can make that happen for you. Or if you want a beautiful woman in marriage, we can ensure that from all the tribes around, you choose who you want, and we'll make sure even that will happen for you. And then the third offer they made is, if you want money, we've got a lot of wealth here amongst the Quraysh. We'll ensure that you are made wealthy, and we'll start you off with your own business or whatever. And so 3 very tempting offers at this time, to which he did remark. He said, you know what, Abu Talib, as much as I appreciate you coming to me, but even if you could take the sun and pluck it out of the sky and put it in my one hand and the moon in another hand, I will not stop preaching this message of Islam. So it's either, and I don't want all these 3 worldly things that you are proposing to me. Now, having made these offers and having had these offers rejected, we then go into a more critical phase of the Prophet's life, which is from the age of 50, where this red line starts. This heat map shows that this was when, you know, when tempting offers are made and if someone doesn't want to agree, then you start using force. So then you start initiating what is called boycott or sanctions. And this small nascent group of Muslims, very small community, a pact was made amongst all the different tribes of Makkah at the time to say no one must trade or barter and deal with the Prophet or his followers in any way whatsoever. Don't buy or sell anything to him and from him. So there was a total boycott on this group of Muslims, and life became so hard that when an offer came from Abyssinia, the Prophet ﷺ told a group of people, Jafar, please go to Abyssinia across the Red Sea. And who knows, that King Negus of Abyssinia was more sympathetic to them. Maybe he will give them some refuge. And he did actually give them refuge. So that was the first hijrah to Abyssinia. Then we have the Mi'raj that came as a gift of salah to the Prophet ﷺ, who was taken to the 7 heavens and given the fact that 5 daily salah should be performed. So that was some sort of comfort and solace to him. And then they were able to read, but they couldn't read in Jama'ah because of the onslaught of the neighboring kuffar that were very, very strict against them meeting and they raided houses where they were meeting to study the Quran, etc. So they were kind of in small groups trying to study what they could in the Prophet's presence. Then two significant losses happen in this period, which is he loses his uncle Abu Talib, the one like pillar of support that he had, although non-Muslim, but nevertheless a kind person to him. And he loses his wife Khadija al-Kubra at this time in the early years, just before the Hijrah. At that point in time as well, because in Mecca the message was not being accepted, he decides to go to Taif. And there we know the famous incident where they put slaves on him to stone him, and he was bleeding to such an extent that he had to leave there without even getting one single person to be accepting Islam. And when the angels came to him to say, we're giving you that option, that do you want these two mountains to be engulfing them? If you just say so, we'll do it for you. And he had a vision to say, you know what, although these people haven't accepted Islam, maybe their progeny will, and leave them alone. So he came back there disheartened, but nevertheless positive, to say maybe in the future something else will happen in Taif, and we know that it did happen like that in later years. And then we have the great event of the Hijrah, which is the migration. Now, all in these years, while he was Al-Amin and As-Sadiq, people trusted him to such an extent, although they didn't believe in him or in his message, but they actually trusted him to the point where they had coins or gold or even some goods. They said, you know what, we can only trust you to look after it, and please look after it. So he was given these things, and the amazing thing about this particular trust and amana, he kept up to that trust till the very last night before he was going on the Hijrah. Now, if you look at just the 2 or 3 nights before the Hijrah, the tribes of Makkah got together and said, you know what, because if one tribe had to kill the Prophet, the blood money will have to be paid in recompense to that particular tribe. But if we collectively agree that there will be one member from each tribe collectively holding a sword and going to kill the Prophet, then we take collective responsibility of having got rid of the Prophet. Now this was the plan. So when the plan was announced, this is when Allah revealed to the Prophet that now is the time to make the Hijrah, and he purchases his first camel from his friend Abu Bakr, and in the darkness of the night they leave with the message given to us that Ali was in his bed to say that these items that are left, that are amana of these kuffar, you must give this item to so and so, that item to so and so. Imagine the man who is being hounded and almost, now they've come to a point where they want to kill him. And even at that point, his honesty comes forth and he says, you know what, please ensure that these things are given to their rightful owners, even if I'm not here. So this was an amazing quality of the man. The other one offer that I don't mention, that I haven't listed here, is the offer of a compromise situation. I haven't listed it here, but this happened about a year or so, a few months just before the Hijrah. And Sura Al Kafirun, which we're going to study today, is actually about that compromise. And we'll study that a bit later. Okay, now if you look at the full heat map and what goes on beyond after the Hijrah, now he makes this Hijrah to a place called Yathrib, which out of respect to him, the early Muslims, the Ansar of Medina that accepted Islam, said, let's now call it Medina to Nabawi, or Medina for short, and that's how it came to be known as Medina. And life wasn't hunky-dory at that time as well. As you can see, the very second year after the Hijrah, the Battle of Badr was fought, where Abu Sufyan and his caravans came, and the battle was fought on the outskirts of Medina, and the Muslims actually had won that battle, and the Meccans had to retreat. A year later, they faced the onslaught of the Battle of Uhud, where you know the famous mountain of Uhud, this picture here, where archers were asked to look after a pass, and they left their positions, and it almost turned out a disaster for the Prophet and his companions. And Hazrat Hamza, his other uncle, died in this particular battle. And you remember that famous incident that even after Hamza's body was dead on the ground as a shaheed, Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, was so sort of hateful and had so much of hate for the Muslims that she actually cut open the body, took out the kidney and liver, and actually chewed on the body of Hazrat Hamza, which is quite a rare thing for, to show how uncivil people can be. But this was the extent of the hatred that the kuffar had for the Muslims. Then we have 2 years later the Battle of the Trench, where the whole of Medina was surrounded and the Muslims had built a trench and they safeguarded themselves. And after almost a full month of an onslaught of the city, they were able to withstand the enemy lines, and the kuffar were able. There was a sudden windstorm towards the end of about 26, 28 days of the siege, and then they simply retreated, having lost very few people on either side. But that wasn't all. The 6th year of the Hijrah, the Prophet now, from a position of strength, goes with a group of his Sahabas to Mecca with the intention of performing Umrah, in other words, with no arms, not with the intention of fighting or doing a conquering or anything of that sort. And at Hudaybiyah, they were stopped, and the Meccans didn't allow them to go further, to enter Mecca, even though they were in Ihram. And the famous Treaty of Hudaybiyah was signed, which essentially had 4 clauses, that any Meccan person that decided to emigrate after this treaty was in place to Medina, the Muslims would actually hand that person back to the Meccans. And the reverse was also that if any Muslim decides to renege on Islam and become a murtad or to renounce Islam and go back to Mecca, then that person will not be returned to Medina. Right? Now, if you look at just these 2 clauses, these were looked at upon by the Sahabis, as some Sahabas at least, as being a very one-sided treaty that favored the Meccans, to say that how can we sign such an agreement? But Allah revealed Surah Al-Fath, which was, that's Inna fatahna laka fatha mubina. Surely we have given to you a very resounding victory, even though it didn't look like one to them at the time. The other 2 clauses were definitely good ones, which is, they said, for the next 10 years there'll be peace in the peninsula, and anybody that breaks that peace, in other words, fights with another party, then technically the treaty will be null and void. And then the last clause was that you can't perform Umrah this year, but if you came next year, we'll allow you to at least come into Makkah, even though there's idols around the Kaaba, but you'll be allowed to at least perform the Umrah. So the treaty was signed. It lasted for 2 years, as you can see, from the time of the 6th Hijrah till about the 8th Hijrah, until there was one tribe that fought against another tribe and one Muslim was killed, and then thereafter But in that period, the Prophet ﷺ was able to sign up significant treaty arrangements or peace arrangements with all the other tribes that were around. And then we have the issue of even the Jewish communities, the Banu Nadir, Banu Qurayza, who fomented trouble who sided with the Meccan Quraysh during the battles that were fought. And gradually these tribes were exiled from Medina, and Medina was became a more stronghold for the Muslims. Then we go later, about 9 years after Hijrah. By this time, Islam now started spreading far and wide. Delegations of 80 to 100 people came and accepted Islam, and Islam just grew. Then we have the 10th year of the Hijrah, which is almost his last year. We have 3 important events that happened. The first is the Fath Makkah, which is the opening of Makkah, also sometimes known as the conquest of Makkah, which Surah Idha Ja'a Nasrullahi wal Fath is revealed in that as a precursor to what's going to happen of the Fath Makkah, the opening of Makkah. And in that same year, the first Hajj was performed by about 30,000 Muslims. And we know the final sermon, the Hajjatul Wida sermon, was the first charter of human rights was actually delivered on Arafat mountain. And there a few months later, when the Prophet came back from the Hajj, he actually passed away. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So if you look at now, I'm going to try and link what I've just told you in the glimpse of the history to what was, in terms of the revelation, what was happening. Now, if you look at the age of 40, when the first revelation happened, it was Iqra. Soon thereafter and it's not totally accurate, like it didn't happen actually in that particular year, but somewhere in that period of that 40 to 46 year period, Surah Al-Fil was revealed. Now, Surah Al-Fil we've studied, which is Alam Tara Kayfa Fa'ala Rabbuka bi Ashabil Fil. The first verse is talking to the Prophet directly to say, have you seen how we dealt with the companions of the elephant? Because he was not born at the time, some 40, 50 years previously in the year of the elephants. And it was a recall for the Quraysh to say, did you guys who were hiding on the mountains around Makkah, did you not see how Allah dealt with them very, very severely and decisively? Right? And having come out of that, where the Kaaba was saved from an onslaught of an army from Yemen, did you as a Quraysh not see that as an eye-opener for you to say, you know what, there was divine help, and through divine assistance, these army of elephants and Abraha and his army were actually defeated. And it continues into Surah Quraysh that's saying, oh Quraysh, we sort of protected you by allowing you to form these trade agreements between yourselves and other parties. We made Makkah an economic hub, an economic center of economic trade in that time. And we allowed your caravans to travel in the north and the south during the winter and the summer months for trade, and you were able to do this trade easily without any hindrance. So should you not, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, should you not worship the Lord of this house? So this was a second reminder to them to say, you know what, after giving you all these sort of ni'mats and blessings that we've blessed you with, peace, security, food, etc., and comfort, why is it that you still follow this idol worship that you're doing? And this was another reminder to them to say, please change. Time is running out. But as we know, the Quraysh remained the Quraysh, a few converted, but not many. Then we had Surah Al-Fatiha as well. The full surah was revealed at one of the first few surahs to be revealed in its entirety from verse 1 to verse 7. A little later, we have Surah Al-Ma'un, which was talking about the small acts of charity, which we just covered in our revision a little earlier. And then we have Surah Al Kawthar, which is another surah, which is the next surah I'm going to cover now, leading on, and what that one is about. Then we look at about the age of 50, during this period of the boycott years, we have Surah Al-Ikhlas, which is Qul Huwallahu revealed. Surah Al-Lahab as well revealed about one particular uncle of the Prophet who was a very, very severe enemy of Islam. And then if you look at post the Hijrah period, the two surahs, Inna Fatahna Laka Fatham Mubina, Surah 48, Surah Al-Fath, which was the victory because of Al-Hudaybiyah Treaty. And then a few years later, Surah Al-Nasr, which is Idha Ja'a Nasrullahi wal Fath. So all these we will be covering in the next few lessons. So with this particular backdrop of the history context, as well as the Prophet's life and what were the ups and downs in his life, we now move on to the next one, which is Surah Al Kawthar. Now, to understand Al Kawthar, we start off with this last word, Al-Abtar. Right now, Al-Abtar, if you want to insult somebody, you can be sarcastic to the person. You can call him names. In the case of the Prophet Mahomed, people called him Sahir, which is like a magician. They call him a Sha'ir, which is a poet, because they looked at this Quran as sheer poetry, and with no knowledge of poetry, he was able to compose verses that floored the poets of the day. So they called him a Sha'ir, or from the Shu'ara. They even called him a madman, a Majnoon. There's a jinn that possessed him, and he was articulating wahi as if, controlled by some or other superior or other force outside of him. And they carried on to the point where they even used this word batara, abtar. Right? Now, how the word batar comes in is that if you look at the Prophet's personal life or family, Prophet ﷺ was blessed with 3 sons called Qasim, Abdullah, and Ibrahim. Ibrahim was from another mother, Maria Al-Qibtiyah, the Maria the Coptic. And he had 4 daughters, Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, and Fatima. So Khadija radiallahu anha had 6 children, and Maria Al-Qibtiyah had 1. And if you look at those 3 sons, in Arab sort of tribal sort of mentality, they regarded as the birth of a daughter as being almost like a curse on them. So they had in Jahiliyyah practice, they used to do this inhuman act of actually bearing a female infant, a newborn female infant, while she was still alive, they used to dig a hole in the sand and literally bury that girl alive to show their sort of venom and the hatred towards the girls. Then in terms of the boys that were born, they looked upon boys as continuing their lineage, and they took pride in the fact that I've got 2 sons, I'm better than you who've got 1 son. And the fact that my name will continue into posterity because of the fact that I've got sons. Now in the case of the Prophet, he had 3 sons and 4 daughters, and it so happened that the other 2 sons had died, and when Hazrat Abdullah was born, the Quraysh of the day were actually sad. And notice the situation was quite unique in that Abu Lahab, who was like his neighbor, right next door with a little wall separating the 2 houses, when the birth of Abdullah happened and there was joy in Muhammad's household, on his neighbor's side, there was grief. They literally went into sadness to say, hey, you know what, we were glad that the other 2 sons died, but now this 3rd son, the fact that he's got a son, his progeny is going to remain, and people were actually in mourning as a result of this great thing that happened in Muhammad's own household and his own family. But unfortunately, a few months or a few years later, even Abdullah, the last remaining son of his, died in early death. And this surah, so when the death of that Abdullah happened, the Quraysh, Abu Lahab included, Abu Jahl and Al-As ibn Wa'il, these were inveterate enemies of Islam. They used to say, very jovially, Qad butira Muhammad. In other words, Muhammad's progeny has been ended, or has been amputated, or has been curtailed, and we are very, very happy about it. So they were actually joyous about the fact that this person had lost a baby, or a baby son. Now, if you just look at just common humanity and common civility in society, when a birth happens, everybody rejoices, and when a death happens, everybody sympathizes, whether it's Muslim, non-Muslim, whoever. This is just human courtesy, that this is the little bit of respect we'll show to even somebody who we don't like, but at least the day somebody dies in that house, we go and pay our respects and show our sympathy and try and be sort of gracious and comforting to the person. But the Quraysh some of them were opposite to this. They were happy at the joy of this on this particular occasion. So now look at that word butir or abtar. We'll come to a more detailed explanation of that. Now on this occasion, when the Prophet lost a son, what does Allah do? Allah consoles him by revealing the shortest surah of the Quran, which is very, very profound, saying in Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna surely we a'atayna, which is we have given you or blessed you with, Al Kawthar. Now Al Kawthar was from the word kathir, which means much or many. Kawthar means abundance. Now imagine you just lost a son, and Allah the Almighty is telling you, you know what, never mind the son you lost, but I'm giving you something even better than the son, which is Al Kawthar. In other words, kathir magnified so many, many more times. Right? And Kawthar is also, they say, the source of the greatest spring in Jannah. And we're going to describe that spring just now to you. So replacing a goodness in this life with something a far greater bounty in the akhirah, or in heaven itself, we are going to bless you with something no one can imagine, no one has seen, and it's one of the best, clearest waters of, in Jannah that you're going to be blessed with, and you're going to be feeding your ummah out of that blessed fountain of abundance. All right? And so that's the one consolation point to you, that and a'ataynaka, a'ata yu'ti, a'ata is the past tense verb. So Allah is telling the Prophet Muhammad that I'm not going to give you, right? It's not sanu'ti laka or sanu'tika al Kawthar. That would be the future tense. Here he's saying, surely we have given you already. In other words, it's a given thing, it's a fact. There's no doubt about it that when Allah talks like that I have or we're going to bless you with something, or we've given you this thing, you can take it for granted that you've got it already. It's to your credit, and you're going to see it, and you're going to witness it and experience it. So A'atainaka is like guaranteeing something that's going to happen in the future, but talking of it or describing it as a verb in the past tense. So this is the amazing quality of this particular verse. It's talking about a future event, but in the past tense. Then the fact that I'm giving you this, Allah is telling the Prophet, what must you do in return? You must do two things, simple things. For salli, perform your salah regularly, on time, with khushu, with sincerity, with ikhlas. So for salli li rabbika, in other words, do what the Quraysh don't want to do, which is فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. They don't want to worship at the house, but I'm instructing you, O Prophet, you must perform salah to your Lord, your sustainer, the one who nourishes you and gives you whatever you need. And what else must you do? You must do one har. Now, nahar is a sacrifice of a grand scale. Like, in other words, where you sacrifice a camel, not a sheep or a goat. You're sacrificing the biggest of animals that you can when you're giving charity. Now, look at the context of this. Now, I remember I told you this was literally in the days of deprivation. In other words, at one of the hardest times in the life of the Prophet, when literally the boycott days were on them. The boycott and the sanctions were the harshest at the time, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't even own one camel at the time. And the command here is that you must actually make this big sacrifice, right? And it's an order. You must fasalli, you must perform your salah, and one har is another order that you must make a sacrifice. Now, even though it was not possible at the time, we'll see later in history this actually becomes a reality where in better years, in the 10th year after the Hijrah, when the Prophet goes for his first Hajj, 100 camels were slaughtered, and he slaughtered 63 with his own hand. So this became like a prophecy as well, in a sense that you were told to do something, you are unable to do it now, but in the future, even some 10, 12 years later, you will do it for me and it will be done. Right? And also this one har, if you look at that previous surah about Arayt al-Ladhi, we mentioned the fact that Abu Sufyan used to slaughter a camel, and then from it, when a yatim came one day to ask him, give me one small portion of the meat, and he actually shrugged him away with a stick and said, you know not, you go away. This meat is reserved for other people. Now look at that act of selfishness of Abu Sufyan in another surah, just in the surah before this. And here in this surah, at a time of extreme sadness, the Prophet is given hope to say, you know what, you're going to be blessed with Kawthar, and in addition to that, you need to do two things, just pray regularly and do the sacrifice whenever it's possible to. And then it goes on to the last verse, which is, Inna shaniyaka, surely Shani is your enemy, he's the one al-abtar. Now if you look at the verb form, batara and butira is a passive that your lineage has been cut off. Now if you look at from the word batar, you get, if you want to make the comparative, say if you look at the word kabir, right? In Arabic, kabir means big. If you want to make it bigger than something, like somebody is bigger than somebody else, you put an alif in front, so it becomes akbaru min. So you'll say hadal walad akbaru min Ahmad or whatever, right? So this boy is bigger than Ahmad. And if you want to make it the superlative, which is the biggest, you say al-akbar. Akbar, and you can even put al in front to make it even more sort of supreme and more big and the greatest. Right, so you have Kabir, Akbar, and Al-Akbar. Right? Now here, if you look at Batar, it's the same way. Here you're talking of Abtar, which is like a superlative, or like a extended form of it, one who is the most cut off. And then Allah has even put Al in front. So Al meaning that definite person who is the most cut off person is Al-Abtar. So who's going to be the cut off person? Not you. Even though your progeny is not going to be continued because you might not have any male offspring future in your future life, but the enemies of yours are going to be the ones that are really and truly going to be cut off, in the sense that they'll have nothing great to shout about. The wealth they've earned is going to mean nothing for them, and they're going to be shown consequence of Jahannam, which is really the abyss that no one really wants to be. So the one who is really going to be cut off is your enemy that's going to be cut off. Okay. So this was the condescending tone with which he was addressed, and Allah takes that same word and throws it back at the kuffar of Quraysh to say, you are actually going to be cut off, not him. Right, now just to explain these things a little further, if you look at Al-As ibn Wa'il, and Abu Jahl was famous for using this term against him, right? And the Prophet ﷺ was, although a prophet chosen by Allah to be the last of the chosen prophets, look at what he goes through in his life, personal life. He lost his parents when he was very, very young. He lost his uncle as well, or uncles. He buried all his children except Fatima radiallahu anha, who's the only one descendant of his family that survived the Prophet, in other words, lived a few years after the Prophet's demise. And this actually is any parent's nightmare, where you are tested with death in your family by death of people very, very close to you, your immediate family, your parents, your wife, your children, and everybody is dying around you. How much can a person bear in terms of losing young and people that are very close to you? And the Prophet unfortunately went through all this, but he survived the ordeal, and in all this he was given Al Kawthar, which is far superior to anything else in this world. So Kawthar is a source of a lot. It shows infinite supply of things. It is the banks alongside the fountains, which is made of pearl. The water is whiter than snow, sweeter than honey, and one sip and you will never feel thirst again, for those who are going to be granted the abode in paradise. I mentioned the fact about the word given is in the past tense. It's guaranteed to be given to you. So this is something like a surah that consoles a prophet at a time of severe loss. And although you are faced with this calamity, Allah says, actually it could have been worse. You've only lost a son, but I'm giving you so much more in return. So this is a lesson for us from the surah, that you must, whenever calamity befalls you, think of all the gifts you are still having, you are blessed with, maybe your own health, your own wealth, the other people, the loved ones, the neighbors, your family, your friends, your relatives, whoever is around you. They will actually help, hopefully console you, and this tragedy will come to pass with patience and ease. Right, and what you should do in return on personal level is thank me, so show shukr to me through your salah and to regular good deeds, as well as making more sacrifice and giving more charities that actually helps you to console yourself and get over this particular calamity. Right, we mentioned the nahar. It's a big animal. So later, after the hijrah, he slaughtered his first camel. Right, and Shania, we mentioned, is the one who maliciously hates you. In other words, your inveterate enemy. And today, amazing thing about this is that the people hate, like that time, the Quraysh hated the Prophet with this kind of venom, and he was yet the Rahmatul lil Alameen. So amazing that somebody who has so much of mercy, but people actually hated him with this kind of venom. And obviously they will then be cut off. And after the surah was revealed, they say the Prophet was actually crying and mourning the death of his son, but when this surah was revealed to him, his face became radiant like a full moon, and he smiled, and the Sahabas were actually very happy that this surah sort of came down at this point and consoled and comforted him. Now, what is another lesson we can take from this surah is that if you look at the Prophet ﷺ, in his own lifetime, he was demeaned, he was thrown the insides of the intestines of a camel on his back when he was performing salah. He was thrown thorns on his path when he walked to injure him. In Taif, he was pelted with stones. A rock was even thrown on him and stopped midway, almost before he was killed. He was even poisoned by people. He was even used, there was magic and witchcraft, and we covered that in Surah Al Kawthar. He went through all this, and he went through so many deaths in his family, but he survived all that and came out stronger on the other side. Now, when we have Islamophobes in our communities today, where people publish a cartoon, ridiculing the Prophet or making him look like one old man with an awkward looking beard and with a dress that looks funny or strange to so-called today's civilized standards. I mean, how do we deal with Islamophobes? Here's the solution in this particular surah, that when the Prophet was mocked, what was his response? He didn't pick up, a sword and go out there fighting and wanting to kill people. And Allah also tells him what he must do. You must just do فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرِ. In other words, if you do charities and you win over the hearts and minds of the poor and the orphans in your communities, these people will talk in your favor and talk for you and be on your side rather than against you. So for Islamophobes, this is the remedy for us. We should not be, sloganizing and burning embassy walls and vehicles and going on a rampage. We should show the humaneness of the Prophet's character when he was under an onslaught. And when this shone through in his character, people just melted when they saw him, the stature that he held and the way he treated his enemies, his inveterate enemies at that. So we need to take hope that even our enemies, they will be actually al-abtar, and you don't have to worry about them. So today they might be able to publish that cartoon, they might even republish it, but one day is one day when your humanity and that will just shine out and you will win this cause through peaceful and more sublime means. Right? So this is what our role should be. Don't be a fanatic, rather be an ambassador at all times. Show humility, shine out and lead the way and let others see your brilliance. And the funny part about 9/11 as well, many people actually after that event actually accepted Islam. There were mosques in America that, they had such a good relationship with the non-Muslim community in the environments that, and I visited this mosque in Southern California, in Los Angeles in fact, where they say after 9/11 happened, the non-Muslims actually came and formed a wall of honor around the mosque to stop any fanatical American from bombing that mosque as a result of 9/11. Now look at that. Will we, if we are having an onslaught in this country, do you think our non-Muslim neighbors will actually support us and be with us? In other words, have we built the bridges? Have we looked after their orphans, their widows, their old people, their old age? Have we done so much of good for them that they will actually support us when we are being attacked one day? And that's a question to ponder about from this particular surah. Okay, let's move on to the next surah. Now, obviously, I always cover this way, where I say at the end of one surah, you must try and memorize both the Arabic and the English. Look at what it means, try and internalize it. And after you've done that, go through just the Arabic and see if you can recall what the English of all those verses mean. And then you do it in a reverse format, where let the English be said or be in front of you and see if you can put the Arabic words next to it. That will ensure that if you can do this exercise on your own, your salah will become more meaningful when you actually read it. Okay, now we move on to Al Kafirun. Now, this is another surah which I think we just need a bit of explanation before we start with it. To look at the word kafara or kafir or kafirun that's mentioned in this particular surah, we need to look at it as a continuum. So on the one side, on the extreme right, I'll put the verb aslama, and from there you get the word Muslim and Islam. So Islam is on one side as the basis of what you believe in. And we know the basis is the 5 sort of pillars of Islam. The Shahada, where you acknowledge Allah and His magnificence and His greatness to be the Rabb, and you the slave, and Mahomed to be the final messenger. And then we have salah, the zakah, hajj, and fasting. 2 of these are very personal, to develop your own piety, and 2 are very communal. The hajj, to understand what the issues are in the Muslim world at large. When you go there, you realize sometimes what a pathetic state we are in and how disunited we are. And it's a way of, understanding the barometer of what Muslims are, the condition of Muslims are in the world. So you go for hajj and you understand that. And if you look at zakah, zakah is a charity that is compulsory, and we need to give it with a smile and voluntarily, and something that is the haqq of the poor that needs to receive it. And we should not put conditions on the zakah and the charities, give it with an open heart and let whoever has to benefit from it. So these are the 5 pillars, which is Islam on a very, very baseline level. And hopefully we are all operating at that level. We've got those 5 pillars in place. Then you look at a degree higher, which is Iman. From there you get the Mu'min, which is where you look at the 6 or 7 articles of faith, where you believe in all the prophets and the day of judgment and that good and evil is from Allah, etc. That's another level. And then you get Ihsan or Muhsin, which is the highest level, where you worship Allah in a way that even if you can't see Him, you remember all the time that He is seeing you. Now that is at a very, very high level, where piety and your taqwa is of such a level that every action you do throughout your 24/7, your whole life, is with that consciousness of Allah watching you, Allah seeing you, Allah hearing you. So everything you utter, everything you do with your feet and your hands, with your lips, with your tongue, with your ears, with your eyes, everything is in conformity to the Sunnah, and you're doing it for His sole pleasure. That is the highest level of what a Muslim can aspire to be. Now, I've used the word aslama to show like sort of subservience, or somebody who voluntarily submits his will to the will of Allah. Right? Now, if you look at as a continuum, Islam, Iman and Ihsan fall on the right-hand side, and on the far other extreme we have kufr or kafir or kafara, the verb kafara. Now, kafara has got 3 connotations. The one is to disbelieve, to be an infidel, to blaspheme, or to, just to not accept the truth as you see it, the haqq as it's there. That's the one meaning. The second meaning is to be ungrateful. So while a Muslim shows shukr and hamd for all the things that he's blessed with or she's blessed with, on the other side, the kafir shows ungratitude or ingratitude. In other words, when they are blessed with something, they waste it, they throw it away, they burn it, they do all kinds of strange things with all the ni'mats and they try not to appreciate the fact that it came from someone high and mighty and the Almighty. And the third meaning of kafir is to cover or to hide something. Now, this is also quite an interesting connotation of the word kafir, because what you're hiding or what you sort of blocking yourself off from is that you're blocking your mind from being a rational being to say, you know what, all these bounties I can see in my environment around me, the greatnesses of Allah is manifest in everything that we see around us, and the sunrise, the sunset, all of His creations, the food we have on our tables, all these ni'mats. What we're doing is we covering or we putting a veil or hiding the fact that we're acknowledging His greatness, that it was Him that gave it to us. On the kafir side, they feel that I earned it, and because I worked hard and this money is now mine and the wealth is mine, I can use it the way I want to, or I can even waste it the way I want to, and there's no accountability. So that idea of having deen meaning the one is the religion, but also the deen meaning the day of judgment or the day of accountability. That day of accountability doesn't exist for the kafir. Right? So that is why they use the word YOLO, which is you only live once and have the best life and do whatever you can and enjoy it as much as you can. So this is the life of a kafir, where when you are in denial of Allah and the supremacy of that being and the Rabb, the fact that He sustains and nourishes, then you've blocked yourself or you've covered yourself away from this faith actually entering your heart or your mind. And also the other thing about a kafir is that they do what is like ritualistic, in the sense that if their parents or grandparents did a certain act, they would simply do it without questioning the rationality or the logic behind it, and they would simply do it. Whereas when you put Islam in front of them, which is an alternative way, they look at that as something that is alien, foreign, they don't want to accept it. And the thing about a kafir is, like, if you look at the Quraysh, they believed in a kind of a super being, right? Although they worshipped in idols, but they knew there was Allah. And I mean, Surah Al was an example of it, where they left the Kaaba to the to the owner of the house to protect his own house. And they had that commitment that, although we don't want to get into a war with Abdool and his army, but Allah will deal with them. So they believed in that. Then they also had exposure to Christians and Jews in that vicinity who had the Torah and the Injil with them. And they obviously heard about previous prophets and how, and what the fact that they also preached Tawheed. But that Tawheed that those prophets preached and which Muhammad was also preaching, they just put a cover or a veil or a, blockage or a barrier between them and that message, and they just remained apart. Now, this is basically the disbelief. So you find this, between the two ends, you have kufr on the one side, you have Iman, Islam, Ihsan on the other side, and in between you have something called a munafiq as well, which is a hypocrite where they profess one thing but they do something else, and we need to be careful of them. And Surah Al-Munafiqun is a whole chapter dedicated to this category that's in the middle, neither here nor there, but earning the wrath of Allah nevertheless, because they have, in a sense, not accepted Islam in its totality and they still doubt it. So basically this surah is about talking about the worship of false deities, the worship of one God, and it also talks about some of the idolaters that suggested to the Prophet as a compromise. Now this is where, I used the word compromise earlier as well, where they said, although we don't believe in what you believe, and you also kind of don't believe what we believe, but let's do it this way. Why don't you 1 year believe like we do, and the next year we will believe like you do? In other words, 1 year we'll become muwahidun or muwahid, believing in the oneness of Allah, and in another year you become a mushrik, or you do shirk. So in that particular sort of offer of compromise, Allah is very, very clear. He reveals this surah to tell the Prophet, Qul, you, O Prophet, addressing one person, Qul, not Qulu, right? Ya ayyuha, O, and he's named this group of people as the Kafirun. That Qul, say, oh, you disbelievers, right? I, the Prophet, A'bud, from Ibadah, I do not worship ma, what, ta'budun, what you worship. وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا عَبُدْ, and nor do you worship what I worship. So there's these two verses is talking of the present tense, to say, currently, whatever you are worshipping, I'm not worshipping that. So in other words, you are looking at your idols, Allat, Al-Hubal, Manat, and all the different idols you've got there. I don't worship them. I worship one unseen God. I've got Tawheed in my heart and mind, and I worship something totally different from what you worship currently. Then if you look at the repeat verses, which is Wala ana abid ma abattum, Wala antum abiduna ma abud. Now abattum is the past tense, right, of the word abada, ya'abud. So I am not a worshipper of what you have worshipped. We're talking of back in the past tense, and actually in the future as well. So this, the way it's written in that verse, it's talking about all three tenses now. The first verse 2 and 3 talked of the present tense, like right now, and these next verses 4 and 5 is talking of the past and the future, that actually we are different. I will never worship what you worship in the future, and I have never worshipped in the past what you are worshipping also. And at the end, what's the answer to your compromise? Lakum dinukum, to you is your deen or your way of life, your accountability. Waliya, and to me is my deen. Dini means my answerability to my Allah, as well as on my, the deen is also the Maliki Yawmiddin, the day of judgment, the day of accountability. Also that Arayt alladhi yukazibu bid-deen. You see that word deen coming in there as well. So the word deen is religion as well as day of judgment in all these different contexts. All right, so it's a very deep construction of the way it's manifested in this. So it's very, very profound. It says, you go out, and in a very, very open way. Now imagine the softness of the Prophet. He never said it like this before. He never addressed the Quraysh in this harsh terms before. And he was told, literally in the harshest and the last of his, the boycott years, he has to go to the Kaaba in front of all those Quraysh, stand up and say, you know what, oh Quraysh, I'm announcing to you right now, you are first of all kuffar or kafirun, and in terms of worship, where we stand with each other. Presently, what we worship, and going forward as well, how it will be. Right, so their crime was the denial or the shirk. They stopped him from saying ilah, or you know Bilal, he said ilah, ilah all the time, and they punished him and tortured him on the hot Arabian sands just to make him renounce the word ilah, but he continued, and alhamdulillah, he survived. So stop saying what you are preaching to us. Now, making dawah is very much like being a salesman. We're trying to encourage people to sort of change their habits or change their belief system or change their preferences. But it was a very, very hard thing for the Prophet ﷺ to actually do. And it was very heavy words for the Prophet ﷺ to say, but he actually went there and he said it. And it's addressed to this brand of kafirs there, where there was no hope and no future. Allah sort of condemned them to being kuffar all their lives. Now, although this was addressed to this group, from their progeny, obviously, there were others that converted in later years. So it's not talking about those later people that are going to be born and who accept Islam in a later period. Right, Ibn Taymiyyah talks about the 5 conditions of a relationship between an abd and a rabb. In others, between a servant and a lord. It talks about ibadah, ita', love, tawakkul, sincerity. All that is part of the Muslim ihsan and mu'min. So what we should do is be as a slave, worship Allah, and have this ubudiyah concept firmly entrenched in our minds. And another thing about iman and kufr, iman, like kufr, is also timeless. You can't say that I'm going to worship on a Sunday to Allah and the other 6 days of the week is going to be my days. Or worship Allah on a Jumu'ah and feel the rest of the week I can lead my life the way I want to. It's a 24/7 thing in your heart and mind. Once you're convinced of it, you need to practice it in its entirety. And also the other thing is when this surah was announced, at the end, it was basically an ultimatum to the Quraysh to say, although we've gone through so much hardship, we are going to definitely, this is the end of the road for us as a community in Mecca. Me and my companions are going to now literally leave or do something different and sort of leave Mecca. We don't belong here anymore because obviously this is not a haven for Islam, and the doors of dawah are going to be closed permanently. And when the hijrah was announced, the Prophet actually made the migration and he left. All right, and the last deen is also from the word dain. Dain is to do with a loan or what you owe. So it's to do with the day of accountability. And you will face consequences like I will face consequences. So whatever I've done is good, I will be recompensed for it. But whatever you have done, your idols, leave it to them to do what they have to do in terms of what it is. Okay, so once again, just to recap, we need to look at the surah, try and understand what all the concepts mean in this particular surah, try and memorize it, and then try and give the English in this version and the Arabic in that version. And inshallah, with that we end today's lesson. I'm hoping that all of you will start using these surahs more often, read them more often in your salah, so it becomes a more meaningful exercise. So we end with Wal Asr, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr, Innal Insana Lafi Khusr, Illa Alladhina Amanu wa Amilus Salihati wa Tawasaw bil Haqq wa Tawasaw bis Sabr. Shukran. Ma'as-salama.